They call it the Ardennes. I call it the place where God's breath froze solid. It was January 1945. The snow wasn't just falling. It was an angry white shroud trying to bury us alive. You couldn't see the air you breathed, but you could sure as hell feel the fear tightening your chest like a vice. We were Company F, just a handful of black boys shivering in foxholes dug into Belgian soil, trying to pretend the army cared whether we lived or died. We knew the rumors. The Krauts had broken through the line. The big counteroffensive, they called it. We just called it the cold end of a bad joke. The quiet was the worst part. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the compressed, heavy quiet, right before the thunder. Corporal Doc Johnson, a medic who was forced to carry a rifle because they barely trusted us with bandages, tapped my shoulder. His eyes, usually full of tired humor, were wide and glossy with panic. "They're coming, Private," he whispered, the words freezing instantly in the air. Not patrols, not a skirmish, the whole damn thing. Then the ground started to shake. Not from artillery. It was a rolling, seismic tremor of hundreds of men marching, their boots crushing the ice, their voices a low, guttural roar that carried through the woods. We were outmanned, outgunned, and 3 miles beyond any hope of immediate help. I gripped my M1 Garand so hard my knuckles turned white. My whole body was screaming run, but my feet were frozen solid, cemented to the only patch of dirt the army had seen fit to give me. I peered through the dense, frosted pines, and then I saw them. Not ghosts, not shadows. 500 strong, a wave of gray and steel cresting the ridge, and they were walking straight for us. In that moment, surrounded by the enemy and abandoned by our own command, I knew this wasn't just a battle. This was where we were going to die. If you want more unheard stories from the men who fought the real war, the one they kept out of the history books, do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe. It's the only way to make sure these voices, these memories, don't freeze in the snow forever. My name is Private Thomas T.J. Jones. I was 18 years old, a kid from Harlem who swapped the tenements for a uniform, thinking I was chasing democracy. It was 1945, and I was deep in the mud and blood of the European theater, specifically the Belgian front. The Battle of the Bulge was winding down, but for us, the segregated 92nd Infantry Division, the war was just reaching its freezing, terrifying climax. The official military history barely mentions us, the black soldiers. When they talk about the cold and the fight, they picture white faces. But we were there fighting 2 wars, one against the Krauts and one against the prejudice that kept us in the worst positions with the shabbiest gear. They put us on the front line because, frankly, they didn't care if we held it or not. We were expendable. My company was a makeshift assembly of weary souls pinned down near a small, forgotten village. The air was so cold that our breath turned into instant, fragile smoke. The central conflict wasn't just the freezing weather or the Nazi advance. It was the chilling realization that our survival depended entirely on ourselves. No white officer was coming to save the Negroes fighting in the snow. This was our fight. This was our hill. And in the face of 500 advancing men, only one of us had the vision, the desperate, brilliant courage to stop them dead in their tracks. The world had shrunk to the length of my foxhole, 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, and colder than a banker's heart. We'd been digging for 2 days straight, taking turns hacking at ground frozen solid as iron. My fingers, even inside the wool gloves, felt like brittle, dead twigs. You learn to hate the cold more than the bullets. A bullet might miss. The cold never misses. It seeped into your bones, made your teeth ache, and turned your brain to slush. Every shiver was a reminder that the world wanted you dead just as bad as the Germans did. We were an attachment of the 92nd, but we felt more like orphans of the army. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant Miller, a white officer fresh from West Point who looked at us like we were a sanitation detail he'd been forced to inspect, had his command post half a mile back. We hadn't seen him in 36 hours. "Hold the line," was the order that came crackling over the field phone before it went dead. What line? We were just a scattering of holes in a snow-covered forest. In the hole next to mine were Big Earl Thompson and Sergeant Hayes. Big Earl was a farm boy from Alabama who carried 3 extra bandoliers like they were nothing. Sergeant Hayes was our rock, a career man who'd fought in the last war, or so he claimed. He was the one who kept us from either freezing solid or running. "Keep your heads down and your powder dry, boys," Hayes muttered, his voice a low, gravel rasp. "And don't you dare fall asleep. That ain't sleep the cold is offering you, that's death." And then there was Private Samuel, Quiet Sam Washington. Sam was different. He was from somewhere deep in the Louisiana bayou. He barely spoke, and when he did, it sounded like molasses dripping on a hot day. Most of the men kept their distance. In a place where loud talk and nervous jokes were the only medicine we had, Sam's silence was unnerving. He was always watching, not scanning the horizon like a soldier, but watching like a hunter. He'd stare at the way the snow drifted, the way the branches cracked under the ice, the behavior of the crows that picked at the frozen corpses out in no man's land. Lieutenant Miller hated him, called him slow-witted and simple, but Sergeant Hayes always said, "That boy ain't slow. He's just listening to a different station." Right then, Sam was the first one to notice it. I was trying to chew a piece of frozen ration bread that tasted like sawdust in despair when Sam put a hand on my arm. He didn't say anything. He just pointed. I strained my eyes, peering through the dense curtain of snowfall and the skeletal trees. At first, nothing. Just more white, more gray. "What is it, Sam?" I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. He just tilted his head, and then I heard it. It wasn't the whump of mortars or the crack of a rifle. It was a rhythm. A low, muffled thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of boots, hundreds of them, thousands. It was the sound of an army on the move, and it was coming right at us. Big Earl scrambled for his bar, Browning automatic rifle. "Sarge," he hissed. "Sarge, wake up! We got movement!" Sergeant Hayes was already up, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He lowered them slowly, his dark skin turning a sickly gray. "Lord have mercy on us," he breathed. "It's the 1st SS, the Leibstandarte." He didn't need to explain. We all knew the name. Hitler's personal guard, the elite, the fanatics, the men who took no prisoners, especially not black ones. The first wave of them crested the ridge, maybe 400 yards out. They weren't running. They were walking. A solid sea of German gray, helmets gleaming dimly, rifles held at the ready. They looked like an unstoppable machine, an iron tide that would just roll right over our pathetic little foxholes. Behind them, we could hear the clank and groan of armor. Panzers. Panic ripped through our line. It was a physical thing, a sickness that jumped from man to man. "Where's our support?" someone screamed. "Where's the damn artillery?" "There ain't no support, Private," Hayes roared, trying to keep the terror out of his own voice. "It's just us. Fix bayonets. Prepare to hold the line." Hold the line? Against that? It was suicide. It was a firing squad where we dug our own graves. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely chamber a round. I started praying, making promises to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. And through it all, Quiet Sam Washington just stood in his hole, unmoving. He wasn't praying. He wasn't loading his rifle. He was just watching them. His head was cocked, his eyes narrowed. He looked analytical, like he wasn't looking at an army, but at a math problem he was trying to solve. "Sam, get your head down," I yelled. He ignored me. His eyes scanned the advancing line, then drifted to the right toward a narrow ravine that cut between two wooded hills about 100 yards ahead of our position. It was a natural choke point. Then he looked at Sergeant Hayes. For the first time all morning, Sam spoke. His voice wasn't scared. It was calm, almost bored. "Sarge," he said, his Louisiana drawl cutting through the panic. "Gimme Big Earl, and gimme every grenade we got." Sergeant Hayes stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "What in the hell you talking about, boy? Get ready to fire." "Fire ain't gonna stop 'em, Sarge. It's too many," Sam said, still calm. He pointed at the ravine. "But they ain't gonna fit through that gap. They got a funnel. You and the rest of the boys, you just gotta make 'em want to go through that gap." Sergeant Hayes looked at Sam, his face a mask of disbelief. The German line was now 300 yards out and closing. We could hear their officers barking commands in that sharp, terrifying German. "Make 'em want to go through the gap? Private, are you insane? That's our only flank. If they get in that ravine, they'll roll right over us." "No, Sarge," Sam said, pulling a satchel charge from his pack. His hands were perfectly steady. "They ain't gonna get through it. They just gonna get in it." He looked at Big Earl. "Earl, you trust me?" Big Earl, who was built like a mule and twice as stubborn, just stared at Sam. Earl was a man of simple pleasures. Hot food, dry socks, and his bar. He wasn't a man for complex tactics. But he was also a man who knew fear. And right now, The army marching toward us was a fear bigger than anything he'd ever known. He looked at the 500 Germans, then back at Sam's quiet, steady eyes. He nodded once. "What you need, Sam?" "Your bar. And your nerve," Sam said. He slung his own M1 over his back. "Sarge," he said, turning back to Hayes, his voice suddenly hard, authoritative. "You got 20 men left? You're gonna put 'em all on our left flank, way over by the creek. You're gonna make 'em fire everything they got. Make a noise like we're the whole damn First Army. You gotta make 'em believe our strength is left, and this right flank," he gestured to the ravine, "is our weak point. Make 'em think we're trying to keep 'em out of that ravine." Hayes was a career soldier. He followed orders. He didn't take them from a private. But he was also a man cornered. He saw the logic. It was a desperate gamble, but it was better than sitting here and getting slaughtered in our holes. "And what are you going to be doing, Washington? While we're drawing all that fire?" "Me and Earl," Sam said, hefting the satchel charge. "We're going to be the welcome wagon." Hayes' jaw tightened. "You got 2 minutes, then we open up." He turned to the rest of us, his voice booming with a confidence none of us felt. "You heard the man. Platoon, to the left flank. Move like your mama's calling you for supper. Lay down suppressing fire. I want those kraut heads down." The rest of us, including me, scrambled from our holes, hunched low, slipping and sliding in the snow, running toward the frozen creek bed on the far left. It felt wrong. We were abandoning half our line, but the alternative was, well, there was no alternative. As I ran, I looked back. I saw Sam and Big Earl grabbing every extra grenade, every bandolier, every ammo they could find. They weren't running away from the line. They were running parallel to it, disappearing into the dense, snow-covered pine trees that bordered the right side of that ravine. They were moving like ghosts, vanishing into the white. "Jones, get your ass in this hole!" Hayes roared at me. I dove into a shallow ditch next to him. The rest of the platoon, maybe 18 or 19 men, fanned out. We were stretched dangerously thin. The first wave of Germans was now 200 yards out. They hadn't fired a shot. They were just marching, a terrifying, disciplined wave of gray. "Fire!" Hayes screamed. Our world exploded. Every rifle, every bar, every M1 went off at once. The crack, crack, crack of the Garands and the heavy pounding thump, thump, thump of our 30 cal machine gun tore the frozen air apart. We poured lead into the center and left of their line. It was chaos. We weren't aiming for kills. We were aiming for noise. We were a small dog trying to sound like a wolf. The German line faltered, surprised by the volume of fire from a direction they hadn't expected. Officers' whistles shrieked. The gray mass stopped. They were confused. We saw them dropping to their knees, setting up their own MG-42 machine guns. "Keep 'em busy," Hayes yelled, firing his pistol. "Don't let 'em think." The Germans returned fire. And Lord, did they return fire. Their machine guns sounded like a giant tearing a sheet of metal in half. Bullets snapped over our heads, thudding into the frozen dirt bank in front of us. Snow and ice chips peppered my face. I squeezed the trigger of my M1, ejected a clip, fumbled for another with numb fingers, slammed it home. Ping. I didn't even know if I was hitting anything. I was just making noise. But I wasn't watching the Germans in front of me. I was watching the right side of their line. Sam's gamble was working. The German officers, believing our main force was concentrated on their left, our left, saw the undefended right flank, the ravine, as the path of least resistance. It was textbook, Angriffsschwerpunkt. Find the weak point and punch through. Whistles blew again. We saw the officers waving their arms, redirecting their men. A huge column of them, dozens then hundreds, broke off from the main assault and started veering right, heading straight for the mouth of the ravine. They were going to flank us. They were going to get behind us and cut us to ribbons. They were walking right into Sam's trap. "They're taking it, Sarge," I yelled over the din. "They're taking the bait. Just keep firing, Jones," Hayes shouted back, a wild, desperate grin on his face. "Keep their heads turned." I watched as the first 100 Germans disappeared into the narrow cut. The ravine was maybe 50 feet wide and flanked by steep, rocky sides covered in ice and pine. It was a natural bottleneck. Another 100 followed them, then another. It looked like a whole battalion was pouring into that narrow gap, convinced they were about to win the battle. And then, silence. Not from our side. We were still firing like madmen, but from the ravine. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Hayes looked at me, his grin fading. Where are they? And then, Big Earl opened up. He wasn't in the ravine. He was above it, on the ridge. He had his bar set up on a high ledge, giving him a perfect, plunging angle of fire straight down into the compressed column of men. He wasn't just shooting, he was enfilading them. It was a slaughter. The thump-thump-thump of his bar echoed off the rock walls, and screams, human screams, terrified and pained, rose from the ravine. The Germans in the gap were trapped, shoulder to shoulder. They had nowhere to go. They couldn't climb the icy walls, and they couldn't advance into the wall of lead Earl was sending down. They tried to retreat, but the men behind them were still pushing forward, creating a horrific, panicked bottleneck. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Hayes yelled to us. Our guns went silent, and in that silence we heard the real horror. The screams, the German officers shouting, and a new sound. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It was Quiet Sam. He was on the other side of the ravine, opposite Earl, and he was just dropping grenades. Not throwing them, dropping them like a man dropping stones into a well. He was methodical, calm. He'd pull the pin, let the spoon fly, count 1001, 1002, and just drop it over the edge into the mass of gray uniforms below. Thunk, boom, thunk, boom. Each explosion was amplified by the stone walls. It was a meat grinder. The Germans who weren't hit by Earl's bar were being ripped apart by Sam's grenades. The ravine had become a perfect killing box. The main German force, the ones still in the open field, stopped dead. They watched in horror as their flanking maneuver was annihilated. They saw their elite comrades trapped and butchered by an enemy they couldn't even see. Then Sam dropped the satchel charge. It was a massive whump that shook the ground. A plume of black smoke and white snow erupted from the ravine, followed by a final, awful silence. The attack had stopped. Just stopped. The 500 men in the field were frozen, staring at the smoking gap that had just swallowed a third of their force. And in that quiet, we heard Sam's voice, not loud but carried on the cold air. "Hey, Earl," he called across the gap. "Yeah, Sam," Earl yelled back, his voice giddy with adrenaline. "I think we pissed him off." The silence that fell over the field was louder than the explosions. It was a vacuum, heavy and absolute. The 300-plus Germans still in the open plain just stood there, paralyzed, looking at the smoking ravine that had just eaten their comrades. We, in our foxholes, were just as stunned. We stared at the gap, then at the woods where Sam and Earl had been. After a long minute, the two figures emerged from the tree line, moving slow, heads down, weapons held at the low ready. They weren't running. They just walked back to our line, climbed into their holes, and started reloading. Big Earl was shaking, but not from the cold. It was a high-frequency tremor, the kind that comes after the adrenaline drains away. He fumbled a fresh magazine for his bar, dropping it in the snow. "Damn," he whispered, picking it up. "Damn, damn, damn." Sam was Sam. He calmly wiped the soot from his M1, checked his remaining ammo, and took a sip from his canteen. He didn't even look winded. He looked like a man who'd just finished a day's work. The rest of the platoon just stared. No one spoke. We'd all seen it. We'd heard it. We were supposed to be dead. We were supposed to be a smear on the map, a footnote in a report about a failed holding action by Negro troops. And we weren't. Because of him. Because of the quiet man from the bayou who Lieutenant Miller had dismissed as slow. Sergeant Hayes was the first to move. He walked over to Sam's foxhole, the snow crunching under his boots. He stood there for a second, just looking down at Sam. Hayes was a proud man, a man who'd earned his stripes through 2 decades of taking orders and swallowing his dignity. We watched, holding our breath. Hayes slowly unclipped a grenade from his own web belt. He held it out. "You're low, Private," he said, his voice rough. Sam looked up, nodded once, and took the grenade, clipping it to his own belt. "Good work, son," Hayes said. That was it. That was all that was said. But in that moment, the entire platoon changed. The command structure didn't just bend. It broke and reformed. Hayes was still our sergeant, but Quiet Sam was now our leader. We had seen a miracle, and he was the one who'd performed it. The fear we'd felt for the Germans was replaced by a new, fragile kind of hope, and it was all centered on this one man. But the Germans hadn't gone home. The shock wore off. The gray field erupted in shouts. We heard the whistles again, frantic this time, full of rage. The main force wasn't retreating. They were angry. They had just watched their elite brothers in arms get butchered in a trap, and they were going to make us pay for it. "Here it comes," Hayes roared, back in his element. "They ain't gonna try and be smart this time. This is pure hate. Load up." And then the ground really started to shake. It was the sound I'd been dreading. The sound we all dreaded. The high-pitched squeal of metal treads on frozen earth, and the guttural coughing roar of a Maybach engine. "Panzer!" I screamed, pointing. "Panzer! Dead ahead!" It rolled out of the trees like a beast from a nightmare. A Panzer IV, its long 75mm cannon sniffing the air. It was followed by another, and then a third. They hadn't sent the armor into the ravine. They'd kept them in reserve. Now, they were the tip of the spear. "Bazooka!" Hayes yelled. "Where's the damn bazooka team?" "Dead, Sarge," someone yelled back. "Took a mortar hit this morning." A cold, sick dread washed over us. My M1 Garand felt like a child's toy. Big Earl's bar might as well have been a slingshot. We had nothing that could stop a tank. The Panzers lumbered forward, unstoppable. The remaining German infantry, hundreds of them, fanned out behind the tanks, using them as mobile shields. This was it. This was the real attack. The ravine had just been the appetizer. The first Panzer stopped about 150 yards out. Its turret swiveled, the long gun sweeping our line. It was searching. It fired. The whump crack of the high-explosive shell was deafening. It hit a tree 50 feet to my left, vaporizing it in a cloud of splinters and fire. The shrapnel thwipped through the air. Someone screamed. A short, wet sound that was cut off instantly. The second tank fired, hitting the frozen bank in front of us, showering us with dirt and ice. The third methodically began shelling our machine gun nest, the one that had done so much work earlier. We heard the thump of the gun and then the crump of the explosion, and the machine gun went silent. We were pinned. We were being systematically dismantled. "We gotta move," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Sarge, they're zeroing us in." "Move where, Jones?" Hayes yelled back, his face streaked with frozen mud. "There's nowhere to go. We fire on them, the tanks get us. We sit here, the tanks get us." The infantry had started their advance again, moving steadily behind the wall of steel. They were 100 yards out. This was the end. And then Sam spoke again. His voice was just as calm as before. "Sarge, I need 2 men." Hayes looked at him, his eyes wide with desperation. "For what, Sam?" "To pray?" "To hunt," Sam said. He pointed, not at the tanks, but at a cluster of ruined Belgian farmhouses about 60 yards ahead of us, just to the right of the advancing Panzers. They were stone, mostly just foundations and a few collapsed walls, half buried in the snow. "That lead tank," Sam said. "He thinks he's the king. He's moving up, buttoned down. He can't see nothing but what's in front of him." "So what?" I said, my teeth chattering. "So," Sam said, pulling 2 sticky bombs, crude sock-like demolition charges filled with Composition B, from his pack. "He's got a blind spot, they all do, right up close." I knew what he was saying. It was suicide. A sticky bomb only worked if you ran right up to the tank and slapped it on the armor yourself, and that was assuming the hundreds of infantrymen walking behind it didn't shoot you first. "That's crazy, Sam," Big Earl said, his voice shaking. "You'll be dead before you take 5 steps. You're dead if you stay here," Sam replied, not looking at him. He looked at me. "TJ, you're fast. You were a runner back home, right?" Yeah, in high school," I stammered. "Good." He handed me one of the sticky bombs. It was heavy, covered in a tar-like adhesive. "Big Earl, I need you to do what you do best, make noise. When I give the signal, I need you and Sarge and every man left to put every bullet you have into that infantry. Don't hit the tanks. Hit the men behind them. Make 'em duck. Make 'em lose sight of us." "And what are you doing?" Earl asked. Sam chambered around in his M1 and pulled the pin on his last grenade. He didn't hand it to anyone. He just held it. "I'm gonna run distraction." He looked at me. "When they're busy with Earl's noise and when they see me, you run. You don't run at the tank, you run for that farmhouse. You get in the ruins. The tank will pass you. You wait, and you hit him from the back. Aim for the engine deck. Got it? Hit him. From the back?" I was going to be behind the lead tank surrounded by the German army. "They won't be looking for you there," Sam said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "They'll be looking at me." "What are you going to do, Sam?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sam Washington gave the slightest hint of a smile. It was the first one I'd ever seen. "I'm from the bayou, TJ. I know how to handle big dumb animals. You just gotta get 'em mad enough to make a mistake." He looked at Hayes. "Get 'em ready, Sarge." Hayes nodded, his face grim. "All right, boys. On Sam's signal. Fire for effect. Give 'em hell." The lead Panzer fired again, the shell screaming just over our heads. It was now 80 yards away and closing. Sam took a deep breath. He looked at the sky. Then he put the whistle to his lips that he'd taken off a dead German sergeant 2 days before. He blew it. A long, shrill, defiant blast. "Now!" he screamed, and he vaulted out of the foxhole. But he wasn't running at the tank. He was running away from us straight out into the open snowfield, screaming at the top of his lungs, firing his M1 from the hip directly at the German infantry. He was a single black man running across a white field, making himself the biggest, loudest target in all of Belgium. Entendido. Proseguindo. Paso 5. Capítulo 4. 7. Capítulo 4. The world dissolved into noise. The second Sam cleared the foxhole, every German gun turned on him. It was like he had personally insulted every man in the Wehrmacht. The infantry line, which had been advancing so steadily, stopped and knelt, raising their rifles. The air was split apart by the ripping canvas sound of the MG-42s and the sharp crack of Mauser rifles, all aimed at one man. "Now, Jones!" Hayes screamed at me. "Go! Go! Go!" I didn't think. I just moved. I launched myself out of our ditch, my legs pumping furiously, my lungs burning instantly from the frozen air. I wasn't running at them. I was running parallel, a mad dash across 60 yards of open, snow-covered ground toward the skeletal remains of the farmhouse. The noise was a physical wall. To my left, I heard the desperate, defiant roar of Big Earl's bar and the frantic ping-ping-ping of our platoon's M1s as they poured everything they had into the German infantry. To my right, I heard the concentrated fury of the German army trying to erase Sam Washington from existence. Bullets I couldn't see snapped past my head, sounding like angry hornets. I kept my head down, my gaze locked on the pile of stones that was my only hope. I held the sticky bomb against my chest like a newborn baby, my other hand clutching my useless rifle. I felt a sharp, hot sting in my left thigh. I stumbled but didn't fall. I didn't even look down. There was no time. Get to the stones, get to the stones. It felt like an hour, but it was maybe 10 seconds. I dove, not ran, the last 5 feet, crashing over a low, collapsed wall and landing hard on a pile of icy rubble and charred wood. My chest heaved. I was sobbing for air. I finally looked at my leg. A bullet had torn clean through the fleshy part of my thigh. Blood was already soaking through my wool trousers, hot and dark against the snow. It hurt, but the terror was a stronger drug than the pain. I was inside their lines. I peeked through a gap in the stones. The German infantry was 30 yards away, their backs to me, focused on Sergeant Hayes and the others. They were advancing again, stepping over their own dead from the ravine trap. And then the ground shook. The lead Panzer, the one I was supposed to kill, rumbled past my hiding spot. It was so close I could have reached out and touched the ice-caked treads. It was a monster of steel and oil and death, its 75mm gun pointing forward, searching for Hayes. The tank commander was buttoned up, just as Sam had predicted. The hatch was sealed against our rifle fire. He was blind to anything not directly in his sights. It didn't even look at the ruins. Why would it? The threat was in the foxholes. I watched it pass. The broad, flat rear of the tank, the engine deck, was right there. A perfect target. My whole body was screaming. Stay down, stay hidden. They'll pass. You'll live. I was 18 years old, bleeding in the snow and hiding behind a rock. But then I looked across the field. Sam was down. He was a dark shape lying motionless in the white expanse, maybe 100 yards away. He had done it. He had drawn their fire. He had traded his life for my chance. And if I stayed hidden, that trade was for nothing. The tank would roll over Hayes and Big Earl, and the infantry would clean up the rest. Sam's sacrifice, the brilliance of the ravine, it would all be erased. A new feeling pushed the terror aside. It was cold and sharp. It was rage. I pulled the cap off the sticky bomb's fuse. It was a simple friction pull lighter. I grabbed the bomb, the terry adhesive already freezing and stiff. You have to run. You have to slap it on. You have to make it stick. The infantry was still moving, focused on the fight. The tank was 20 yards past me now, exposing its rear. Now or never. TJ. I took a deep breath, pulled the cord, and heard the small fizz of the 4-second fuse. 4 seconds. I burst from the ruins, my wounded leg screaming in protest. "For Sam!" I roared, not caring who heard me. The 3 infantrymen closest to me turned, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected an American behind them. They were too slow. I was running on pure adrenaline. 1001. I covered the 20 yards, my boots slipping. The back of the tank was right there. 1002. I raised the bomb and slammed it, with all my strength, onto the metal engine grating. The adhesive, cold as it was, held. 1003. The infantrymen were raising their rifles, shouting. I didn't run back to the ruins. I dove to the side into a shallow bomb crater, curling into a ball and covering my head. 1004. The explosion was not a boom. It was a deafening metallic crack that felt like it split my eardrums. The concussion punched the air out of my lungs, even in the crater. Hot shrapnel and pieces of the tank's engine cover rained down, tinking against my helmet. I raised my head, my ears ringing. The Panzer had stopped. It just stopped. A thick, greasy column of black smoke poured from the hole I had just made in its back. It was dead, crippled. The infantry around it, stunned by the blast, had fallen to the ground. From our line I heard a sound I'll never forget. It was Big Earl letting out a wild, joyous whoop. "He got it! He got the bastard!" The German infantry, their steel shield now a smoking wreck, faltered. Their attack lost its momentum. They were exposed, confused. I tried to stand, my leg buckling. I had done it. I had actually done it. I looked over at Sam's body in the snow, wanting to tell him we'd done it. And then I saw it. The 2nd Panzer. It hadn't been idle. It had seen its brother die. It had seen the explosion. It had seen the lone American soldier who had thrown himself from the ruins. Its turret, which had been facing Hayes, was now rotating. It swung past the smoking wreck, past the infantry, and pointed, slowly, methodically, unstoppably, directly at the farmhouse ruins, directly at my crater. The long 75mm cannon stared at me. It looked like the eye of God, and I knew, with absolute cold certainty, that I was not getting up. I was out of time. Entendido. Proseguindo. Paso 6, Capítulo 5. 8, Capítulo 5. I was dead. That was the only thought in my head. I was 18 years old, bleeding in a ditch, and a 40-ton German tank was about to turn me into a red mist. I closed my eyes. I thought of my mother's kitchen in Harlem. I thought of how cold I was. I waited for the whump. It never came. Instead, I heard a thud. A dull, heavy sound, like a sledgehammer hitting a carpet. It was followed by a sharp ping. I opened my eyes. The Panzer's long cannon was still pointed at me, but it was wobbling, confused. Smoke was pouring from the commander's cupola. The hatch flew open and a German officer, his uniform on fire, tried to climb out. He fell limp over the side. The tank wasn't dead, but it was blind. I looked across the field past my smoking kill to where Sam lay. He wasn't lying still, he was moving. He was on his belly, crawling. He'd been hit in the leg, bad, but he was moving. He wasn't crawling away. He was crawling toward the 3rd Panzer, the one that had been hanging back. "Sam!" I screamed, but my voice was just a croak. "Get down!" The German infantry, their attack completely shattered, were now just a disorganized mob. They were terrified. Their leader tank was dead. The 2nd tank was blind. And the lone black soldier they thought they'd killed was crawling through the snow like some kind of avenging ghost. They started firing at him, but it was panicked, wild. The 2nd, blind tank, hearing the renewed fire, started spinning in a circle, firing its machine gun wildly, hitting its own men. The 3rd, seeing its partner disabled, began to advance, its cannon sweeping the field, looking for Sam, looking for me. This was it. The breaking point. The whole battle balanced on a knife's edge. Sam stopped crawling. He was 100 yards from me, 50 yards from the last Panzer. He reached into his jacket. Not for a grenade. Not for a rifle. He pulled out a flare pistol, one he'd scavenged from a dead German officer 2 days prior. I'd seen him stash it, thought he was crazy. "What is he doing?" Big Earl yelled from our line. Sam, with a grunt of pure, agonizing effort, pushed himself up to one knee. He was a perfect target. The last Panzer stopped, its turret swinging toward him. The infantry zeroed in. "No!" Hayes roared. Sam ignored us all. He raised the flare pistol high, his hand steady, but he didn't aim it at the tank. He aimed it straight up at the low, gray, unforgiving sky. He fired. A single brilliant red flare shot upward, cutting a crimson streak through the snowstorm. It exploded above us, bathing the entire ruined battlefield in a silent, bloody light. For one eternal second, nothing happened. The Germans stared. We stared. Even the blind tank seemed to pause. And then, the sky tore open. It was a sound I had only heard in my nightmares. A sound like 1,000 freight trains screaming at once, coming straight down. It was the Red Ball Express, our own artillery, our 155mm howitzers. The Germans looked up. Their faces, even from 100 yards away, were masks of pure, primal terror. Sam Washington hadn't just been making a suicide run to distract them. He hadn't just been a hunter. He'd been a spotter. Somehow he knew that our artillery was on call, waiting for a target. The radio was dead, but the old-school signal, a single red flare, was still in play. He hadn't run to die. He'd run to get a clear view of the entire German force to pinpoint their center mass. He'd drawn them all out, the tanks, the infantry, into one perfect, concentrated killing field. The first shell hit the 3rd Panzer, flipping it on its side like a child's toy. The next dozen shells landed in the middle of the 300 remaining infantry. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The ground erupted. Geysers of black mud, white snow, and gray uniforms were thrown hundreds of feet into the air. The whump 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 of the impacts was so powerful it shook the teeth in my head. The screams of the Germans were swallowed by the thunder. The attack wasn't just stopped. It was erased. The entire barrage lasted maybe 30 seconds. When the last echo faded, there was nothing left. Just craters, fire, and the smoking, twisted wrecks of 3 Panzers. The 500-man assault was gone. The handful of survivors were already running, disappearing back into the forest, back toward Germany. The silence that fell was absolute. From our line, a single man, Sergeant Hayes, climbed slowly out of his foxhole. He stood in the open, looking at the field of total destruction. He took off his helmet, his hands shaking. I pushed myself up, my legs screaming, and started to drag myself out of the crater. I had to get to him. I crawled. My leg left a dark trail in the snow. I crawled past the burning wreck of the tank I'd killed. I crawled over the frozen bodies of the Germans I'd run past. I finally reached him. He was lying on his back, staring at the sky. His chest was soaked in blood. The flare pistol was still clutched in his right hand. "Sam," I whispered, shaking him. "Sam, we did it. You did it." His eyes flickered. He looked at me. His face was calm, that same, quiet, analytical look. He wasn't in pain. He was finished. "TJ," he whispered, his voice a dry rattle. "I'm here, Sam. The medics are coming. Just hold on." He gave that tiny half-smile again. "Tell me something, runner boy," he breathed. "You see that red light, all the way from Harlem?" I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I saw it, Sam. It was beautiful." He nodded once. "Good," he said. And then, quiet Sam Washington, the man from the bayou, the man who'd just stopped 500 Nazis in their tracks, closed his eyes and was quiet for good. When the medics finally pulled me out of that field, I didn't let go of Sam's hand until they made me. I got a Purple Heart for my leg and a Bronze Star for the tank. Lieutenant Miller, who showed up 2 hours after the shooting stopped, got a Silver Star for holding the line. They wrote up the official report. Enemy engagement repulsed by entrenched American forces and pre-planned artillery support. There was no mention of Sam Washington. No mention of the ravine, or the charge, or the red flare. His name just went on the list of the dead, another Negro soldier killed in action. I'm an old man now. I've lived a long life. But every time I see a red light in the fog, or feel that first bitter cold of winter, I'm back in that snow-covered field in Belgium. I'm watching a quiet man from Louisiana, a man the world called slow and simple, read a battlefield like a book and break an army with nothing but pure, unadulterated courage. They never built a statue for Sam. They never put his name in the history books, but that doesn't matter. History is written by men in warm offices, but the truth is remembered by the men who were there. And I was there. I was on the front line the moment one black soldier stopped 500 Nazis cold, and I will carry that truth to my grave.